What's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin. Gang's back together for episode 107. Alex Scarborough and Mike Rodak. Fun show for you guys today. Looking ahead to Alabama's game against Vanderbilt this Saturday, 3:15 p.m. kickoff, First Bank Stadium in Nashville. We've all been to Nashville, home of country music. Do you guys like country music? Do you have a favorite country music artist?
I like old country music. I do not like new pop country music that seems to be prevalent these days, but I'm an old man now.
What's the demarcation line between old and new country music?
Brooks and Dunn, maybe.
That feels like a while back.
That's about where I stopped listening though. So
there was a run where I think it became popular and I could listen to some of it maybe like 15 years ago, 12 to 15 years ago. And then I think it really just jumped the shark, which honestly, I think the city of Nashville has kind of jumped the shark in general. I mean, it was I remember my first time there, it was like 2010 and it was very quaint. I mean, obviously you have like Broadway and all that. And then within the last like 10 to 12 years, it's just exploded. And it's like Vegas on the East Coast, sort of Vegas of Appalachia, if you will. And it's just bunch of girls in cowboy boots and everybody's drunk and I don't know. And then it's like you walk down the street and you have these huge glass buildings that are just popping up on every street corner. And it's very strange. It's a strange city. It's a strange team. Vanderbilt's very strange. Like everything about Nashville is strange.
I think we just found the title to the podcast and we're only 2 minutes in.
Vegas of Appalachia?
No, Nashville is very strange. We're going to get into Alabama Vanderbilt later on today's show. Also going to discuss the potential, I think, for strangeness in this game if the EA College Football 25 Sim has anything to say about it. Also just some other interesting factors that maybe we should consider in the lead up to this game. But I wanted to start today's show with a story that Alex wrote because I feel like we do that at least once a week on this podcast. Alex, you wrote a story following Alabama's big win over Georgia. Headline, why Kalen DeBoer was the, quote, perfect guy to follow Nick Saban at Alabama. That is one very well-timed column after they knocked off Georgia, right? Because Kalen DeBoer has now beaten Steve Sarkisian twice. He's beaten Dan Lanning 3 times. He now has a win over Kirby Smart. Pretty good head coaching resume, win-loss record against other premier coaches in the sport. But I'm curious, Alex, your thoughts on just kind of how this column idea came together, what prompted you to write it, and then ultimately kind of what you think about the idea of literally we're 4 games in. That seems like a pretty strong statement or a pretty strong feeling to have early in the tenure, right?
It's less about the football piece of it as it is the people piece of it, the why Kalen could walk into what is an impossible situation with Nick Saban, the greatest coach of all time. You're taking over him, but you're not just taking over for him. He's still part of the athletic department, and he's still on television damn near every single day. So you'd think that would create a really awkward situation where the new guy comes in and either he's trying to be like the old guy or he's trying to be too different and make the old guy disappear. And he's somehow walked this really fine line. And I feel like as we've gotten into so much football discussion in Georgia and all this stuff, we've lost sight of the fact that this has gone incredibly smoothly. And that's pretty much a miracle, in my opinion. Like, there hasn't been any missteps. And it's a testament to both people. It's a testament to Nick Saban. You know, Kalen DeBoer said 100% access. And to Nick Saban's credit, he has not taken advantage of that. He has not overindulged staying around football. But also to Kalen's credit, every chance he gets, he's acknowledging what Nick Saban has built. He kept certain parts of the program, whether you're talking about the fourth quarter conditioning program, whether you're talking about staff, whether you're talking about the way they operate on game day, music, all of those things. He's tried to figure out that fine line of here's what I like to do, but here's what's worked. And it's really speaks to a lack of ego, frankly. because I think a lot of guys would come in and be like, "Oh, this is how I do things." Like that's what Bob Welton, director of player personnel, told me. He's like, "I've gone through these before, and it's always some guy saying, 'Here's how I'm going to do it,' or they're trying to be phony." And he's like, "That was not the case, and you knew right away with Kalen." And I thought it was really interesting. I talked to Greg McElroy a few months back about this, and he said he was very surprisingly concerned when Nick left. Like he prepared himself mentally for it. And then when he leaves, it was like anxiety. Like his wife was like, "What's wrong with you?" Because he didn't know if the next guy would do all these things. He didn't know if the next guy would be welcoming to former players and acknowledge the past. And he said there was a really interesting conversation he had with Kalen where he said, "Greg, it's my program. Like it's mine, but it's also yours. And it's AJ McCarron's and it's Nick Saban's and it's Devontae Smith's. It's everyone's program. And I want you to feel the same way about it under me as you did with Nick." And I feel like that was a huge sigh of relief for Greg. And I think it's been a sigh of relief for a lot of former players. And that's why you've seen a lot of them around when that is not typically the case. I think we just shouldn't take it for granted that this is how it goes because it's not typically how this goes.
Obviously, the results on the field are one thing, but I think you do make a good point that a lot of former players, and Mike, I'll loop you in here as well because you wrote about one of them loosely this week, just Julio Jones, for example, right? Like one of the superstars that really helped jumpstart Nick Saban's Alabama dynasty. He's another guy that has been around the program a little bit. And Jamarcus Shepard, who all-star receivers coach, right? He did a lot of work with those Washington receivers. He's had, there's a history there of him doing some really good stuff at Purdue and a little bit at Western Kentucky as well. And Jamarcus Shepard basically told Julio Jones, like, "Hey, man, like you've been here, you've done this at the highest level, you've done it here at Alabama. Like you are more than welcome at any time to come here and do this." And that seems like it's really cool, like a staff-wide initiative to be like, hey, like the guys that were here before us, the guys that did the thing, the guys that a lot of the current Alabama players probably looked up to are more than welcome to come back, even though we're not the same staff that they played for. And I think you can kind of sense the energy of the thing. Maybe one of those things that you kind of have to look for, but you can sense that, I think, within this new program, even though it's a new staff.
I was looking up some of these, instances of legends being replaced. I'm sure people have researched it a lot for, their Kalen DeBoer, Nick Saban stories recently. You know who did a pretty good job? Jimbo Fisher, 2010, replacing Bobby Bowden. I'm serious, Bobby. 2010.
Hold on.
I'm curious where this is going to go.
Yes, what you're about to say is true. He did all those things, but also there are people there who those years before Jimbo took the job, it was not pretty.
Right.
And there was a lot of blame on Jimbo. So
and there are very few instances of a coach like Saban just retiring.
Yeah.
I want to say at the peak. Like, I don't know if 2023 Alabama was the peak, but it was not bad by any means. Look, another example, Bill O'Brien replacing Joe Paterno. Again, completely different situation, but also replacing a legend, albeit with a lot of extracurricular stuff going on at the end at Penn State. And they did really well the first year. So, and again, Bill O'Brien and Jimbo Fisher aren't exactly, there's not statues of them in Tuscaloosa, probably quite the opposite. So it's 4 games in. This could have looked very, 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 very different this week if they had not scored on that Ryan Williams touchdown play. And we're talking about a blown 28-0 lead. So I do think overall, yes, it's gone very smoothly. I think Kalen DeBoer's personality has lended itself to allowing things to continue in a lot of places and not necessarily wanting to switch things up and jam a square peg down a round hole. I think Josh Chapman, the whole story about the rat traps this week, Josh Chapman having that platform to throw the mouse traps out and say, this is a trap game, y'all, and kind of do what was done last year with Nick Saban and the Kentucky game, allowing that to continue. Like, those are all really good things. It's just, I don't know if it's like this super unique situation that like is off the charts good for Kalen DeBoer. Like, this has been done before. I think you need to see it out over a period of time just see where things go. But I think the returns to this point, 1 month in of actual football, are good. And with that, I need to take a phone call. So I'm apologize for my rant ending at this point.
I will say, and now Mike cannot defend himself.
Ah!
There's some scar tissue, though, for the people who are probably watching this podcast, because all I have to do is mention Ray Perkins' name and the fact of how he followed up Bear Bryant. And I don't think Ray ever intended to upset people, but he upset people in the way he followed Bear Bryant. And that's a thing, like a small thing could have turned into a big thing. And that never happened. And again, it is early. Like Mike's right about that. Like you lose a couple games and it starts to go downhill. But I also think an important thing happened during the game against Georgia, which calmed a lot of people down, including some people I've talked to, was Kalen DeBoer going ballistic on the sideline at a referee.
He went after that ref. That was impressive.
Every Alabama fan I've talked to went, "Oh my God, give me more." It was like this was the tether to Nick Saban, was like, let's see somebody go crazy on the sideline. I think that calmed a lot of nerves too. So while the story, I will admit, was 99% written before that game ever kicked off, that was 1% that I think pushed it over the edge for some people.
And the players loved it too. Like they were asked about it all week, just like, yeah, like that is not something we normally see. Parker Brailsford, the Washington center that transferred in, who has known DeBoer longer than a lot of these other Alabama players, even he was like, that's as fiery as I've ever seen him. Because and Brailsford continued making the comment, you know, like when your head coach is calm and you're in the midst of chaos on the field and you look over there and you see a calm head coach, it calms you down, because if that guy is relaxed, you're going to be relaxed and you're going to focus. You're going to, you know, worry about the next thing and worry about the next play and worry about doing your job. And this is honestly something, like, I know that people love the fiery nature of Saban, but I made this comment, or at least I remember making this comment last year. When you look at some of those bigger, higher profile games, Saban wasn't nearly as fiery. He had that calm demeanor about him for a lot of the same reasons. Hey, look, like you're in the midst of a fire. You're in the midst of a fight. Your coach is very calm over there. That kind of, I think, relaxed a lot of the other players. Now, he was chewing the refs out and chewing his players out against the Mississippi States and the Vanderbilts in the games that they should have blown out, because it's like, look, if you're not taking care of business and doing what you need to do in smaller games like this, you're probably not going to do it in the bigger games where you need to be doing it. So I understand the dynamic of doing that, but it was kind of fun to listen to the players say, yeah, like DeBoer doesn't really do that. He's really calm. He's really even keeled, mild-mannered. And then to see him pop off on the ref like that for what probably should have been a pass interference call, like a lot of them were like, that was cool. That was different, but that was really cool. I don't know. I thought that was kind of fun.
And I want to put another note on the Saban thing. Saban only ever went ballistic when they were winning. When they lost a game, I've talked to a bunch of former players about this. It was the weirdest thing. You'd go in the locker room expecting to get chewed out, and it never happened. It was always like, okay, here's what we have to do, because he knew psychologically it didn't make sense to pile on in that moment. And Nick was very good about pushing those buttons. Yeah, when he went ballistic on Lane Kiffin, I think they were up 40-something points. That's who he was. He was just a perfectionist. But I do think, again, I've heard from multiple people now that they were very excited to see Kalen DeBoer do that, because it reminded them of Saban.
This Alabama-Vanderbilt game, Alabama opens up as 24.5-point favorites. I don't know if that line has moved at all. They haven't lost to Vanderbilt in 40 years. Wanted to discuss the idea of a potential letdown game, why Josh Chapman and the staff brought out the rat traps this week to avoid a trap game. Mike, you mentioned that they did that ahead of the Kentucky game last year after a big emotionally charged win over LSU coming out of the bye week. I feel like there are some similar qualities coming into this game. You just had an emotionally charged game against Georgia that had a bunch of momentum swings, right? Up 28-0, 30-7. Georgia storms back to take the lead. Ryan Williams makes the play. Alabama ultimately wins the game. It was sold out at Bryant-Denny, and you had as many as 14 million people watching on TV. It peaked probably in the fourth quarter as Georgia was mounting its comeback. Now you're playing a team, again, you haven't lost to in 40 years. I believe the last time Vanderbilt beat Alabama, Kalen DeBoer was 9 years old, and Nick Saban was a defensive coordinator at Michigan State. It's been a while. And also, you're going to be playing in a stadium that holds less than 29,000 people, and the game's going to be on SEC Network, where I'm not sure if 1 million people are going to tune in to watch this one unless it gets funny and weird. That seems like the proper ingredients for a potential letdown game. How do we feel about that idea? Mike, I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are some similarities coming off the LSU game last year, which was a big, dramatic game. And then you go to Kentucky, it was a smaller stadium, the crowd was not into it. I think the difference with this game is that it's still pretty early. And at that point, Alabama was basically, I think they needed to beat Kentucky and have Georgia win against Mizzou, I think, to get the SEC.
Yeah, they both clinched their divisions that week.
Or some, yeah, they clinched it with the win, and then Georgia clinched it with their win over Mizzou that day. So you're kind of at the end of the road at that point for both teams. Kentucky was obviously had the towel thrown in already. This is different. Like this, Alabama, I think, has, as we just said, it's only 4 games in. I think that's been the message from Kalen DeBoer all week, is like, we haven't really done much yet. And I think Vandy is not in a situation where they're like, it's over. Like they still have 2 months left in their season. They're playing for a lot. I mean, they only have 1 SEC loss. I guess theoretically they can go 7-1 in the SEC still. So it's a different point in the season. So there are some trap game elements, if you will, but I think both teams have more to play for than what your traditional trap game would be. So there's no reason to let off the gas on Alabama's end. I don't think there's any reason for Vandy to mess around. So I think it's just 2 teams that are playing a game in early October, like any other season. So yeah, I do think it might be weird not having a crowd. I think the crowd is still going to be overwhelmingly Alabama fans. Like maybe that contributes a little bit, but at the end of the day, like you have a much better team than Vandy, and I think the score is going to show it.
I think the other thing that maybe could potentially, maybe not an element of a potential letdown, but a potential for this game to get weird if Alabama doesn't take it nearly as seriously as they did Georgia last week. And Alex, I want to loop you in on this because I want to make fun of you, because Vanderbilt's quarterback, Diego Pavia, look, I love this guy, former wrestler. He's a gamer. He's a bulldog. I don't know that he's
a wrestler.
He is a former wrestler.
Okay.
That's the only time I'm going to mention that. But
all right.
Here's the idea that I think this could add into a potentially weird game if Alabama doesn't take it serious. He is a dual threat quarterback, right? He obviously leads Vanderbilt in passing. He leads them in rushing as well. Last year at New Mexico State, I believe he threw for 3,000 yards, almost ran for another 1,000, 33 total touchdowns. What makes that interesting to me is that Alabama has routinely struggled with quarterbacks that can create in uncomfortable situations or extend plays. And this is a guy that not only does that pretty regularly, but seems to thrive on it and look forward to opportunities like that. That just seems like it's a wild card that Vanderbilt hasn't had in previous years. Kane Womack said earlier this week that you can see this is a team that's playing with a little bit different energy than they have in years past, probably because they have a quarterback who can do things like that. I'm curious, Alex, just that dynamic added to the elements of a potential letdown. Like if Alabama doesn't take this seriously, it could get weird, right?
Yeah, it could. It won't. It could, but it won't.
I agree.
I think there's a lot. There's the main reason I think there's almost no chance this gets weird is because of what happened in the second half against Georgia. If they had just run away with that game, I would say, okay, maybe they're overconfident. But I think they got kind of punched in the mouth and had to respond. The other part of this is I don't think they're taking Vanderbilt lightly. I think you gotta, I don't want to say arrogant because he's not. I don't want to say he's talking crap because he's not. But Diego's a little chirpy. And if you don't think that they're going to twist that and contort that into he thinks he can beat you to this defense, you're lying to yourself. I think
he thinks he's Johnny Manziel. That's what Jahad Campbell said last night.
Jahad Campbell said he has Johnny Manziel-like qualities to him, which I don't know that I necessarily disagree.
Yeah. I know. I'm being a little bit facetious, but like the playing style is similar. I don't know if he has the arm of Manziel. He's not going to win a Heisman, but yeah, he's shorter. He can move around. He's going to be a little bit spunky on the field and be fearless. Like I can see where Jahad is coming from on that one.
I believe the exact quote during his media availability, Diego Pavia's this week, was, if you can't get up for this, you ain't shit. So, and apparently last Sunday, after watching Alabama, Georgia, apparently, and this is again from Pavia's media availability this week, him and his teammates they went to practice on Sunday and just punched each other in the face. Like, just seems like an ornery dude who, again, I think Alabama's probably going to run away with this because of the talent advantage, but I could see him causing problems for like a quarter.
The danger for a letdown game is not for Alabama. It's for Vanderbilt.
That is your headline.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think they're putting a lot into this, and they got a lot of season left, and I don't like any of the matchups. I think, honestly, the letdown game for Alabama isn't this week. I think the game that could get weird is next week against South Carolina because it's before the Tennessee game. It's at home. It's 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock weirdness is a thing in the SEC, especially for home teams. I think that's the game. This is not the game. I just don't see it. I think Alabama's in a really good spot. I think they're going to have the right mindset given what happened again against Georgia and then what they're going to be reading, misinformation or otherwise, from the Vanderbilt part. So, no, it could get weird. We saw South Florida, but I think this is a different team now.
I don't hate that idea at all. Alex, I do want to know, have you at least come around to the idea that Pavia is going to wreak some havoc on some teams this season? You look at his numbers, 721 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, no picks. He's also run for close to 300 yards and 2 more touchdowns. Mm-hmm. This is not an exact one-for-one comparison, but he's similar to Milroe in that he has the ball in his hands every single play, and the Vanderbilt offense seems to run through him. Have you come around to him at all? Like, he's a fun player, man.
Yeah, he is. They play Auburn, so.
Like, if I'm Hugh Freeze, I'm having nightmares about Diego Pavia because when he was at New Mexico State, he beat Hugh Freeze's Liberty team. He walked into Jordan Hare last year again at New Mexico State and beat Auburn. Guess who they play in early November?
He's a good player who will find a way to scare an SEC team. I just don't think this is the SEC team where that happens.
I would argue that they scared Missouri a little bit. I know that wasn't necessarily Missouri's best game, but they took them to overtime in Columbia.
Yeah. No, that's true. And he's got the skill set, and they are playing with confidence. And that's what worries me, is how much they're putting into this game. Because if you get beat by 40 points, you got to pick yourself back off the mat and have a season. Not saying they shouldn't say these things because you're playing the number 1 team in the country. You got to hype yourself up. But I think it's their trap game, not Alabama's.
If the EA College Football 25 simulation, which we've been running all season, we post on Fridays at Bama247.com, is any indication, there is a path here for this game to get weird. And I use that as opposed to letdown because, here's what happened with the sim. Again, we'll post this fully on Friday, but Alabama won 24-17, but it got weird. Vanderbilt was leading in the fourth quarter before, get this, a touchdown pass to Ryan Williams gave Alabama the lead, and they never looked back and ultimately won the game. But in the first quarter, Alabama got stopped on 4th and goal, lost a fumble, and threw a pick. And that kind of allowed Vanderbilt to linger a little bit in the game, right? Later on in the game, a penalty on 4th down extended a Vanderbilt drive that ultimately resulted in a touchdown. Graham Nicholson missed a field goal. Alabama originally scored a safety that was overturned on review. So that just kind of like, again, these sims have been not 100% accurate, but they have provided maybe some hints or some just things to think about. And I think the thing to think about from this particular simulation that if Alabama doesn't come correct and they mess around a little bit, right? Like if they make mistakes and they don't really jump on Vanderbilt immediately, this has the potential to maybe be a little bit of a weird game. And I think if you look back to last season where Kentucky was potentially that letdown game or that trap game, they jumped all over the Wildcats and never really gave it a chance to be weird, right? They came out and scored immediately. They took whatever the crowd was out of it and rolled to a victory. That's obviously the path to get the job done on Saturday. I'm curious, Mike, I'll throw this to you first. What do you ultimately want to see from Alabama to feel good coming out of this game?
A win. It's one of those games where it's like, as long as they do things like generally well, I think it's fine. Like, I don't think we're going to be talking about this game 3 weeks from now. Like, I don't know if it's going to have that sort of impact down the road. You know, you line up, I think you can run the ball. If you can't run the ball, like, something's wrong because Vandy, you should be able to run the ball against Vandy. you can't pass the ball, something's wrong because you should be able to pass the ball against Vandy. If Diego Pavia is throwing for 300 yards against you, something's wrong because that shouldn't be happening. If Vanderbilt's able to run the ball against you, that shouldn't be happening. So, like, as long as you're able to do all those things relatively well, you've done your job, you check the box, you punch your card, and you go on to the next game. Like, I don't know if there's, a huge takeaway or a huge, checkpoint I'm looking for out of this game. It's just don't mess it up. Like, just do what you need to do. Do what you're designed to do. Like, your team is designed to beat Vanderbilt. Like, you have more talent than them everywhere. So just do that and go on to the next game. Like, it's simple to me in that way. Like, I don't know if it's, 3 weeks from now, like, you can't beat Tennessee because you didn't do something against Vandy. Like, I think each game's going to be their own little thing there.
Alex, you agree with that, or what do you want to see?
No, I'd rather see them just be dominant and put the whole damn thing to rest really quickly, because there is that element of what happened in the second half against Georgia and an opportunity to say it was an aberration, and show that you were not taking them lightly. I definitely think there's something to the running game in this game and showing that, hey, we can run the ball traditionally. What I mean by that is giving the ball to Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, and just plowing straight ahead. But the other part of it is the defense could be mildly interesting, because this almost feels like a soft launch to play Nico in Tennessee. I realize they're not the same quarterbacks, but the element of extending plays and athleticism and containment, all of those things are going to come into play this weekend, and I have a feeling they're going to come in and play against Tennessee. So you want to see them do those things at a high level, because if you don't take care of business, it does start me thinking, okay, what is this Tennessee game going to look like a few weeks from now?
I want to see three things from this game. One, I want to see them come out and punch Vanderbilt in the mouth. Like, just come out, start strong, start fast, jump on them, get an early lead, and just come out and take care of business. Two, I would like to see them make Diego Pavia a non-factor. He's a fun player. I enjoy watching him play. If I want to feel better about Alabama's defense and how they play against quarterbacks that can create and quarterbacks that are willing to run the ball, contain him, make him a non-factor. Don't let him gain anything in the way of momentum or potentially a big play early that might make Vanderbilt think that they can stay in a game like this, right? Like, take him out of it. And then third, assuming you take care of the first two and you have a big lead going into the fourth quarter, I'd like to see some of the backups get some playing time. I'd like to see Ty Simpson play in the fourth quarter. I'd like to see our guy Daniel Mountain get some runs in the fourth quarter. I'd like to see Caleb Odom score his first career touchdown, or at least have the opportunity to do it in a game like this. I guess he's played in 4 games, so if he's going to maintain his red shirt, he may not play in this game. But if they just want to throw him out there and play him because he's got a lot of targets through the first 4 games so far this season, this could be a game to do that in the fourth quarter, assuming Alabama takes care of business. That's at least personally what I want to see on Saturday.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think it's going to be a Ty Simpson game if they handle business, where he can attempt a few passes, not just hand the football off and run out the clock.
Right, like, let him run a little bit of the offense.
Ty Simpson in his home state.
Yeah,
wouldn't that be cool? Be a fun little homecoming for him in the strange city of Nashville. I am excited for the potential to eat hot chicken on Saturday after the game. Maybe. We'll see. I don't know. I might have to talk Mike into that. But
we got to get out of there at a reasonable hour. I mean, it's a 3:15 game. We may not be out of there until after 9 o'clock.
Well, assuming Alabama takes care of business, maybe we'll get out of there by 8 o'clock and have some late hot chicken. I'm trying to be optimistic here.
Better than early hot chicken?
That's all we've got today, guys. We'll be back Sunday to recap the Alabama-Vanderbilt game. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 24/7 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports. Brand new month, but the season rolls on. We don't want you guys to miss a thing. I put a link to subscribe in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. Talk to you all again soon.